got Simon in the room anyway. So.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. This is the first meeting of the Select Committee on the petition. And we've got apologies from M&A Big Bigs. But I think everyone else is here, and David Rogerson, our independent advisor, should be joining us shortly. Right, if we move off with the first item, which is the terms of reference. First off, I draw people's attention to documentation relating to the Select Committee on the petition, which can be found on the agenda for this first meeting of the Select Committee, and also additional information relating to the Select Committee on the Communications Bill 2016 and the telecommunications licence can also be found at the assembly.fig.gov.fk website. So to give people background into this subject, should they so wish. First item on the agenda.
I think it's feedback.
Someone needs to mute their.
Can we ask that everyone mutes? I mean, you've got 3 people not mute there.
Could people mute themselves? Yeah. Okay, I think we're all right now. Right, terms of reference for the Select Committee is the first item on the agenda. The suggestion that has come forward is that we restrict ourselves to the 2 asks of the petition, and that is that we call on the Communications Regulator and MLAs to abolish the VSAT licence fee for using Starlink entirely. If a complete abolition is not feasible, we urge you to reduce the fee to a reasonable and proportionate level not exceeding £180 per year. And the next request from the petition was we also call on the Communications Regulator to grant regulatory approval for Starlink to offer domestic tariffs in the Falklands. This would prevent residents from being forced to rely on the more expensive global roaming tariffs, making fast and reliable internet access more affordable for everyone. That's the initial proposal. Anyone have anything to say on that being the terms of reference for the committee?
No, I just think we probably are sensible to restrict ourselves to, those two questions that is raised in the petition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Chair, just to note that obviously with when it gets on to inviting evidence to that first point, it would be interesting to know why not exceeding £180 a year was chosen. That is
it. I think there is a suggestion to request information on that. Right, consider that is accepted as those being the terms of reference for the Select Committee moving forward. So second is consideration of letters to relevant stakeholders. There have been 3 drafts, I think. I think everybody's had a copy of them. The first one is to the Communications Regulator saying, could you please give the Select Committee an update on the need for Starlink to obtain regulatory approval for Starlink to provide domestic tariffs in the Falklands? Is everybody happy with the wording of that letter? Yeah. Excellent.
Okay, I haven't seen that one in the folder.
No, that one's
I know, I also haven't got that one. Is it in the folder?
Should be. Sent round to
I
everybody.
could only see the assurance down in green.
It was circulated in advance to everybody. It's not in the folder.
Fortunately, it's very short.
Yeah.
Yeah, fine.
Okay. The second letter is to the CEO of Shaw. Dear Roma, the Legislative Assembly of the Falklands Government has convened a Select Committee to consider a petition that it has received from a concerned group of residents. The petition, which is being presented by MLA Spink, is to abolish or reduce the VSAT licence fee and approve Starlink domestic tariffs. The VSAT licence fee is currently set at £5,400, but petitioners wish it to be abolished or reduced to a reasonable and proportionate level not exceeding £180 per year. They also seek regulatory approval for Starlink to offer domestic tariffs in the Falkland Islands. The full petition is attached to this letter. To assist the Select Committee in responding to this petition, Shore South Atlantic is requested to answer the following questions. 1. What is Shore's view on the merits or otherwise of this petition? Please explain how you think the Legislative Assembly should respond and why it should respond in this way. 2. What would be the impact on Shore's commercial operations in the Falklands if A, the VSAT licence fee was abolished, and B, the VSAT licence fee was reduced to £180 per annum? And 3, for regulatory approval to be given to Starlink to offer domestic tariffs, it would first require that Starlink were licensed to provide services in the Falkland Islands. What are Shore's views on licensing Starlink? Is it a natural consequence of offering VSAT licenses to end users? Is it compatible with Shore's exclusive licence? The Select Committee is particularly looking for factual evidence based on the current broadband market, in particular customer numbers by broadband package and reasoned modelling of the financial impact that a change in the VSAT licence fee would have. In particular, the proportion of broadband customers that Shore may be projected to lose if the VSAT licence fee were reduced. Please note that the Select Committee's remit is limited to the precise demands of the petition and does not extend to broader policy, regulation or legal matters. Anyone like to?
Am I allowed to speak, Sharon?
Also for the chair.
Okay.
Is it normal? Or is this just from the?
Well, Chair, obviously the proceedings of the committee are a matter for the committee. I think you've intended to have an evidence session to allow folks to submit their evidence in due course. I suspect if members of the committee agree that the letter, probably the time to respond is when the letter is received and prior to.
Received the letter.
No,
No. This is a draft.
That's approving sending it.
Yeah, sorry, no, this is a draft of a letter for the committee to agree, for the Select Committee to agree to be sent. So, yeah, no, we fully appreciate you haven't seen any of this, so, yes.
I think it covers all elements that the question particularly arise. So I can't think of any amendments that I would make.
Right.
Yeah,
No.
I think the only thing I would say there's quite a lot that is wrapped up in that one paragraph.
Yeah, it is.
There's
The detail is important.
absolutely, and so while it can look fairly general, I think there's going to be a lot of fairly detailed and specific information that we're going to want to draw out in that.
And I'd like to thank David Rogerson, our independent advisor, for putting that together. So,
Chair, I suppose the only other point which is possibly best addressed by the next agenda item is then how the evidence can be given and
yes,
whether there will
that's
be any
the
bounds.
next piece. Yeah, that's the last. Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll get that letter sorted to be sent. And the second letter is to the person in charge of regulatory affairs for Starlink. The Legislative Assembly of the Falkland Islands Government has convened a Select Committee to consider a petition that is received from a concerned group of residents. The petition is to abolish or reduce the VSAT licence fee and approve Starlink domestic tariffs. The VSAT licence fee is currently set at £5,400, but petitioners wish it to be abolished or reduced to a reasonable and proportionate level not exceeding £180 per year. The full petition is attached to this letter. The Select Committee is aware that Starlink does not currently have a licence to operate in the Falklands, and as far as we are aware, has not applied to the communications regulator for any such licence. Nevertheless, Starlink services are being used on the Falklands by a number of persons to whom a VSAT licence has been issued for this purpose, and probably by others who have not obtained any such licence, using Starlink's international roaming service. It would be very helpful to the Select Committee in responding to this petition if you were able to answer the following questions on behalf of Starlink. 1. Under what circumstances would Starlink consider applying for a service provider licence in the Falklands? 2. What would be the impact, if any, on Starlink's decision, i.e. whether or not to apply for a service provider licence in the Falklands if A, the VSAT licence fee was abolished, and B, the VSAT licence fee was reduced to £180 per annum? And 3, if Starlink were to apply for and be granted a service provider licence in the Falklands, what would be the likely impact on the tariffs paid by end users for accessing Starlink services? We understand that this is a purely hypothetical question as no domestic tariff yet exists in the Falklands, but we would appreciate any relevant comparisons between domestic tariffs and international roaming tariffs from other jurisdictions. Please note that the Select Committee's remit is limited to the precise demands of the petition and does not extend to broader policy, regulation or legal matters.
Yeah, I will admit, this letter for me was a little bit more, not necessarily, I can't think of the right word to describe it, but a little bit more confusing, I suppose is probably the best way to say. Because are we inviting Starlink to comment on what are our current telecoms arrangements? It just seems a little bit unusual when the direct question to them is more about a request for a service provider license. So particularly that part of the question asks, under what circumstances would they consider applying? Are we better just asking to engage them in that conversation rather than to ask what circumstances would engage them in the conversation? But I don't know. Perhaps some comment from the author of the letter as to why they chose the specific approach.
Perhaps David Rogerson, perhaps if David, if you could, are you there? It's not there.
Yes, I'm here. If I'm understanding the comment, can you hear me all right now?
Yes, certainly, yes.
Yep. If I'm understanding the comment, it is whether we just ask a more specific direct question, would you consider applying, rather than asking the more general, in what circumstances would you consider applying? I don't have an objection to either way. We might learn more information from the broader question.
I suppose I'm a bit more concerned that do we want to bring Starlink into complex matters which are for us to consider, to ask them to offer a view on them. I suppose would that in some way be dissuading to them to engage in the Falkland Islands more generally? But I don't know. It seems quite a burdensome letter for a simple request.
What's your feeling, David?
Well, I guess it could be simplified, but what we really want to know is, have they any intention of applying for a license? And specifically for this request about the fee for the VSAT license, would that impact their decision? Because that's what the committee is being asked to look at, is this fee specifically.
Yeah. Mark and then Simon.
I think one of the things that's worth bearing in mind, you said earlier, Chairman, that you wish to focus on the terms of the condition, the petition. The petition, it firstly does deal with the issue of whether or not Starlink should or could or wants to apply for a regulatory approval here, and could that be granted. That's part of the issue to consider. The other part of the issue, the petition assumes that Starlink would offer a different tariff to users here if it had such approval. And I think it's worth teasing out from them, which I think the letter does, on what terms would they offer services to people resident here if in fact they did obtain a regulatory approval. Because I think, again, that is part of what is assumed by the petition, that actually we have no idea yet on what basis they would offer services directly here. And so I think it's perfectly within the remit of the petition and of the committee to consider and ask them, on that particular topic as well. But I think, as David said, I think it is useful to try and tease out what their views would be on the overall issue in terms of the VSAT license. They're obviously aware of the fact that VSAT licensing, that there is a regime in place here currently.
And I'm sort of fairly agnostic on whether or not we leave out under what circumstances and just say would Starlink consider it. I think that's fine by me, just to say would rather than under what circumstances.
Well, perhaps can we deal with both and say would or are Starlink considering applying for a service provider license? And if not, under what circumstances would they consider it? Because I think it would be quite interesting to know if there is something that is putting them off or acting in any way as a barrier to their application, then to draw that out too. But then it would specifically then ask, are they already considering? Because we know that there is engagement, so that decision may already be.
No, I think the amendment as suggested by MLA Leona seems eminently sensible to me. I think we do need to figure out, or give them an opportunity to express themselves if there is anything that they find off-putting.
So perhaps if the committee could agree to allow the chairman to amend the draft letter that you've been provided with in light of the comments that have been made by members, and then it will be for the chairman to finalise the actual terms of that, and rather than trying to work with it now here. You know, I think obviously your intent is clear enough, and if you're as a committee happy to let the chairman finalise it, that would seem a sensible way to proceed.
Yeah, I think I mean when I read it for the first time, my concerns were that they are a huge company offering a lot of services to a lot of people, and the more questions we ask them, perhaps the less likely they are to answer. You know, whether it's worth their while. But I think if we can get answers to the questions we're asking, then that would be really helpful to this process. So I think on balance, I would agree with going with the sort of suite of questions and with the
slight alteration to that one.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Okay, so everyone's happy with that?
Yeah.
Last question, or is this a closed?
Do we want to open up to ask questions?
I think ultimately that's a matter for yourselves. You'd certainly not contemplated doing so at this.
We haven't, no. I mean, I think that's
obviously
to come after.
There will be full opportunity for anyone who wishes to submit evidence to make representations on all of the issues that this.
Sorry, I'm just jumping at the bit here, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's good. Okay. Right. Guidance for written and oral submissions. I think there has been some guidance about the timing, etc. I think the main thing is whether or not we should receive certain evidence in confidence or whatever. And Simon, you gave us some guidance on that. Do you want to perhaps?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I suppose the Legislative Assembly generally follows the sort of procedures in the House of Commons where there isn't any specific provision within our own sort of standing orders, and I think the provisions of the standing orders of the House of Commons do make provision for people to provide evidence in confidence to a select committee. So in other words, a select committee can sit without press and public present whilst hearing evidence if it wishes to do so, and also then deals with publication of that evidence. Obviously the general position is that evidence that's provided to select committees is published when the report of the select committee to the House is published, but it is possible for certain provisions, certain evidence to be redacted from publication where that's appropriate. And the examples that are given there include commercially confidential information. It includes information that, things like national security information, that sort of thing. There are a whole range of reasons why the committee might agree to accept evidence in confidence. And I think, if the committee is prepared to consider doing that, I think it would be useful for anyone who wishes to submit evidence to ask about that first before they then submit their full evidence, so that then they can have a response and assurance as to what will happen.
Gavin?
Just a question, if I may, directed to Simon. I mean, we seem to be concentrating a lot here on, if you like, oral evidence. I presume that would extend to written evidence as well. For example, if, say, there could be an employee of a company who wishes to make a representation but doesn't wish it to get into the public domain, because it could well cause them problems. As long as they put their name to it, I mean, I suppose what I'm trying to get to, if you receive a letter from disgruntled of Stanley, would that be dismissed immediately, or would we accept something like that?
I think that there has to be a reason related to the evidence as to why it should be accepted in confidence. I think the general rule of thumb is that the select committee should sit in public, should hear evidence in public, and obviously these are matters of public interest, the matters that are being considered by the committee. So I think there needs to be some reason. Now, I can well contemplate you've just read out a draft letter that's going to be sent to Shure. Now, it may well be that in responding to that and responding to the various asks, that the company might, in order to give a complete picture to members of the select committee, wish to submit commercially confidential information. And I think the select committee should, and it may be the same with Starlink, and I think the committee should give serious consideration to accepting evidence on that basis.
Yeah.
Or you run the risk otherwise of evidence not being submitted, and therefore a less informed decision being made, and recommendations to the Assembly accordingly.
So just as an option, obviously, we're aware as a select committee that Shaw have representatives in the room, so are now aware that they can submit evidence in a confidential manner. It's probably less clear in kind of Starlink, as you mentioned, as another agency that may wish to do so. So perhaps that could also be added to the draft letter so that they are made fully aware.
I think we need to adopt some rules and how it works as well. I think how actually practically someone says who is going to be the judge of whether or not that information is.
I mean, ultimately the decision will be for the select committee to make, but I think, sensibly, correspondence is likely to be with you as chairman of the committee in the intervening period, and obviously there is open to you to take advice from officials, advice from the speaker, who is also sat in the room, as well as officials, and Mr. Rogerson, who you've engaged to assist as well.
Yeah, Mark, Leona, and then Tess.
Yeah. Sorry, I might take a little bit of time, but hopefully not too much. But I think we should be doing as much as possible in an open and transparent manner. Now, I understand there may be some evidence submitted that may have sort of commercial in confidence aspects to it, and I think rightly so that should be dealt with confidentially. But I would urge anyone submitting anything with confidential information to perhaps in parallel submit something with that redacted for the public to see and for us to be able to deal with publicly as well without the confidential aspects to it. I would strongly urge people, I would prefer that people put their names to submissions and do not do that in anonymously. I think if you are to submit anything to this select committee for me anonymously or confidential, I think you need a very good reason for doing so. Again, I think the more we can do openly, transparently in public regarding this, the better. So I would urge people to be open and transparent about their communication. One thing I would urge as well is that anyone who's thinking of putting in a confidential submission because they are potentially sort of breaking the law or want to confess to something, I would strongly urge them not to do that as well. And perhaps the Attorney General here could explain why that would be such a bad idea.
Well, I mean, certainly, Chairman, I think people would be well advised not to do that unless they wish to invite action to be taken in relation to their activities. It would seem not sensible for the committee to invite submissions of that nature.
Leona?
Yeah, very, very similar views, to be honest. I think we do need to set some guidelines so that they're clearly understood by anybody who does want to give evidence. I don't think that we should be considering anonymous submissions. I think anybody could say anything, and you need to be able to stand by that. I think there probably are instances where it can be justified that evidence is heard privately. But I think that threshold needs to be quite high, to be honest. I think the importance of a select committee is in its transparency, and I don't think that we should, set the bar too low when it comes to this. but I've also, as a member of the select committee, would welcome some clarity around how we actually judge that. I can see that there might be cases where, you know, commercially sensitive information could qualify as being worthy of being held.
I think, and similarly, I mean, in relation to individuals, it may be that, you know, I mean, it doesn't seem likely to me, but it may be that individuals may wish to disclose information about their personal circumstances, which again is not necessarily appropriate to be shared widely. That would still, it wouldn't be anonymous evidence. The person would still have to be submitting that to the select committee and potentially appearing and giving oral evidence to the select committee, but simply the details that they give would, you know, some of those details may not be publishable. If, you know, that might be around someone's financial circumstances or health circumstances. I can't quite conceive of how that would relate to this particular inquiry, but it is possible, and I think it's that sort of information that would be confidential. So I think the example given by Emily Short earlier, you know, if someone wishes to sort of make representations sort of on behalf of their employer, but not officially on behalf of their employer, I don't really think that is entirely appropriate. I think if companies wish to make representations, then the companies need to make those representations. I don't think it's appropriate to allow employees of companies to, in confidence, purport to give representations on behalf of their companies if the company itself isn't actually making those representations.
Thank you. Obviously, I hope all of this information will be available in those portals which were identified by the chair earlier in this session. But the other point, which certainly was I'd first like to agree with the points that were made around transparency and making as much available for public consumption as possible. I do support that. But also to be sure that we're sending out an indication that while we are looking to gather evidence from every aspect of this community, and certainly everybody who was involved in the petition or in the businesses relating to the petition, we also would be very keen to encourage people from different demographic groups to come forward, or so particularly thinking about, you know, people to comment on services in camp, from younger groups, from businesses, to have a good spread of evidence that we can use in the select committee to be able to make the best decision around this petition for the country. So just to put that on the record there, there will be obviously some limitations around the amount of oral evidence that we can receive, and we discussed that as an assembly just through a matter of time, and we'll try and prioritise it to be sure that there's a good demographic spread represented through those submissions. But we do encourage absolutely everybody to make written submissions, and that's everyone in the country.
Mark.
Yeah, just on the terminology, perhaps for those out there listening, and for those present, you know, when we talk about giving evidence, you know, this is a formal select committee, and we have to use that sort of formal language. Essentially, for those who are unsure exactly what we're meaning, it's making representation to the committee, so providing some information for us to consider. So you know, if people have a view and want to submit that to the select committee, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about a formal court of law or anything that you know, you have to physically sort of sign to and will be judged on. It's you know, we will consider the evidence accordingly. But I think the accessibility of the language is perhaps an issue sometimes in select committees and how we use it.
So in relation to these two questions specifically as well. Just how good.
So we're basing the ability to have evidence submitted in confidence on from S. Erskine, isn't it? I think Erskine May.
Erskine May sets out the parliamentary practice for
which
Parliament
says,
at Westminster.
where a witness considers that the publication of oral evidence or part of it, given in private or written evidence, or part of it, submitted in confidence, would be prejudicial to the public interest, for example, on grounds of national security, or cause unwarranted distress to an individual, or would disclose matters of commercial confidentiality, or would be undesirable on similar grounds, a request may be made that the evidence in question should not be published. The committee may then, at its discretion, refrain from reporting that evidence to the House or may report such summary of the evidence as appears necessary in order to present the grounds of its conclusion to the House. If for these reasons only part of the evidence given to the committee is reported to the House, the committee will indicate in the evidence as published the places in the text where the unreported material has been omitted. Once evidence has been reported and published, it cannot subsequently be altered or any content removed. Yeah, so we're all happy to adopt that as a procedure. Okay. Right. Anything else? Anyone?
Really whether John had it.
No, nothing from John.
Are we still discussing the evidence as opposed to just the confidentiality bit?
Guidance for written and oral submissions, yes.
Yeah, so before we move on from that, can I just say, I think we need to be sort of clear how we're going to do this. I think one of the priorities almost is to move this along reasonably quickly, not to unduly extend it. So I think that, there might well be a very large number of people who would wish to give evidence. Are we going to give some guidance or some encouragement perhaps into how that is done? Because I think we could have a parade of a lot of people coming through essentially saying very similar things, which would prolong the process, has the potential to prolong it. I can't help but think that there might be some benefit in encouraging people who are like-minded, perhaps, to get together and nominate an individual to come and give a collective view, because I think that would, they could all put their names to it, they could all be, part of that, but rather than having 50, 100 people coming through saying what was largely the same thing.
I agree. Yeah.
And whether that's through organisations or however, I think it might just be helpful to indicate that.
Yeah, I think it is important as well, I think, to differentiate between the written evidence and the oral evidence. So I think every individual or business, etc., should feel absolutely comfortable in making submissions in writing to the committee, and as many submissions as can be received. I think then just allows for a better, more rounded consideration of the issue. I think the point that you made, the Honourable Fiona Roberts, is around then collation of who we then, the members of the committee, select to give oral evidence, and there obviously it would be beneficial if individuals who are like-minded are able to nominate a representative or a few representatives who are able to come along, and I think then the committee will have to actively look to select from among those who wish to give oral evidence, those who can give oral evidence, to fit in with the constraints of time and efficient sort of progression of the business. And I think that could include reflecting, as the Honourable Teslam Barkman said earlier, making sure that those representations cover a range of different interests in the matter. So, you've already particularly indicated you wish to write to Sure. Sure may well wish to come along and give evidence. It would be sensible to hear from them. Similarly, there's the petitioners who have actually submitted this petition. So those who've led in that, it would be very sensible to hear from them. But it would be sensible then to look at the other representations you get and see if you can select those. And there may well be some naturally sort of self-selecting bodies. So the Chamber of Commerce may wish to be able to come along and speak on behalf of businesses in the islands. There may be, the Rural Business Association may be able to speak on behalf of some of the camp interests, but ultimately that will be a matter for the committee to look at the requests you've received and then make a decision as to how to select those.
Mark and then Pez.
Yeah, I don't think we've got a guidance note as such on submitting evidence, do we? But
We do. Yes.
It's
on the agenda. It's actually, you can make a written submission. These should be in Word or PDF, comprise a single document. If there are any annexes or appendices, these should be included in the same document. State clearly who the submission is from, i.e. whether from yourself in a personal capacity or sent on behalf of an organisation. Be concise. We recommend no more than 3,000 words in length. Include any factual information you have to offer from which the committee might be able to draw conclusions or which could be put to other witnesses for their reactions, and include any recommendations for action by the government or others which you would like the committee to consider. So that's.
No, my point is that we've just had a fairly lengthy discussion on what the guidance should be around submitting and how we would like to shape that. So if we default back to what we'd already decided before the meeting, do we need to put some of the conversation we've just had into the guidance
Yes,
notes
yeah,
and provide it?
yes.
That's what I'm.
Sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
no, I fully agree, yeah,
I
sorry.
think that's quite practical.
Yeah.
Just there are a couple of points that I wanted to make. Because first of all, I think probably as we're sitting here talking about gathering evidence, I'm sure there's probably quite a large public sentiment that, well, the petition is the evidence. And while that has only been able to get us into this journey of setting up this select committee, it doesn't provide the kind of the detail and the case studies as to why those requests from the public should be considered. So it's more about asking the details. So just obviously we respect the petition, the number of people who have signed it, but now we need to be able to work on the detail as to whether those
What's behind the
questions should be
request.
taken. Exactly.
Yeah.
So just to acknowledge that the Assembly and the committee are completely aware of that. But my second question is probably more for discussion, which is, do we need to indicate how many oral sessions we'll have available for people to be able to apply to give evidence to? And also the difference between oral evidence and what may be interrogation of evidence if the committee wishes to do so, to call in people to kind of interrogate the evidence that they've submitted, whether that would be something that the select committee needs to consider now, because it's a form of oral evidence, but obviously it will be questioning. It may then also fall into that confidential bracket as well, particularly if it's to do with anything financial or commercial or too personal. So, I mean, those may be considerations we also want to make more explicit.
I think in the past, certainly oral submissions have included questioning of the individual giving that oral submission by the select committee. I know the select committee back in 2016, people made representations. This is on the same subject.
We did.
And people were questioned when they came in to give their evidence. But I think we'd also have to have, if there are some commercially sensitive areas that we need to question further, we would probably have to have a closed session as well, I assume. Mark?
We'll need to have a cut-off with written submissions. I mean, we'll receive the written submissions, consider them here, and any questions arising out of that, I guess, could be taken up. But I wouldn't want to get into a to and fro via written submissions that would extend the process out.
No, the closure date for the written submissions are the 21st of August 2024. That's been published.
But the question around whether or not there's a question arising from the written submission from the person writing it, quite how we go about clearing that up, just debating it in here amongst ourselves if the person isn't giving oral evidence to me.
Right, yeah.
Well, I think that could probably be agreed. If there's an outstanding question that would be pertinent to the outcome, we could just make that.
Yes.
Just nodding.
I mean, the committee obviously has decided today to send a number of letters asking certain questions. If further questions arise that the committee wishes to ask any individual, whether that's someone who's sent in a written submission but isn't intending to give oral evidence, then that's within the scope of the committee to ask for further.
And would it be all right if we identify, as those submissions come in, if we identify further submissions, we could do that without having another meeting to...
I think if members of the committee are content that, effectively you as chairman will manage that administrative process, with members of the committee being able to input and ask questions, then that would seem sensible.
Yeah, I mean, we have weekly meetings, and if we have things, I think we can raise a weekly meeting and go back with the questions.
Certainly, I agree. If anything does come up in that written evidence that we wish to either further examine, test, or it raises further questions, then we have to have that built.
And we can publish our letter back.
Person or body.
Yes,
or
and we can publish the letter back in between.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that also might be a useful means of narrowing down who we invite to give oral evidence. If there's one specific question, then maybe that's fine, dealt with through correspondence, but actually if there are a few, you would probably want to invite that individual in to give oral evidence
Yeah,
to answer this.
but I think if we can do it in between the process, it'll speed things up. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
we're going to.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I just noted that the chief executive has put out advice to FIG officers as well, which I think is useful because we wouldn't want it and the FIG response to be confused. So just to thank him for doing that. It obviously doesn't stop people from making individual responses, but outlines some guidance as to how FIG should interact with this select committee.
Great. Okay. Anything else, anybody? I think we're almost there. Yeah. Date of the next meeting is the 5th of September. So
Please get your evidence in.
please, yes, the more evidence and the better for that meeting. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, John.
Yes, thank you very much. At least at the next meeting, the chair will notice that I am alive.